We've all heard the old, if it isn't hurting, it isn't working when it comes to running, but just how outdated is that phrase?
Luckily, I think most of us know that running through pain is not always the answer. But how do we know when an injury or niggle requires a little bit of a break?
Well, today, Manni and I are going to go through when to temporarily hang up those running shoes.
Of course, every injury is going to be unique. So if you are concerned about that injury or niggle, please go and speak to a medical professional.
So let's start off with a relatively simple question, I think. How much pain is too much pain?
Well, it's actually not a simple question because everybody experiences pain in so many different ways. There's so many factors that influence pain, like sleep, what's going on in your life, work, stress, all those things. So what I would say is that pain is an individual experience, and relatively speaking, if your pain is over 5 to 6 out of 10 and it's consistent, it happens on more than one occasion, and it's the same pain you're experiencing in the same place, I would ask you to stop running and seek medical advice.
Is there any kind of test that you can do to check whether that pain is too much?
Yeah, sure. So running is a sport which relies on us jumping and hopping. So one test that we do really easily is jumping. Okay, you jump off the floor with 2 legs, and if there's a specific side that you've injured, then we move on to that specific side. Okay, so right or left leg. So you'd hop on that right or left leg maybe up to 30 times. Another test you can do is then hop onto a step and hop off a step. So hopping on should be a little bit easier than hopping off. So if you have something like a stress fracture, I would ask you to be doing these tests. If you have a muscle injury, I would also ask for these tests. And additionally, tendon injuries, I would do these tests. So there are quite a large array of things I would use these tests for. Have you ever had any tendon injuries or any pain?
No, I've been quite lucky. The only thing that I've suffered with is IT band, which is only kind of presents itself 15k or more into a run. But again, I used the pain scale of like, how much is it out of 10? How consistent is it? And because it was happening every single time I got to that distance, that's when I knew something was wrong.
The reason why that happens is because of muscle strength endurance, which is something that we like to test in clinic. So Sarah actually worked with me when she had her problem.
I did.
And we did a few things where she worked on her single leg strength and how well she could bend her knee repeatedly with load. The other thing is, did you get any pain going downstairs or upstairs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Downstairs.
So and when we hop on and off a step in clinic and I test that will be a way to indicate this is where your pain is, and it gives us a really nice, as a clinician and as a patient, it's a nice little way of going, there we go, that's the problem. And it's a good diagnostic tool we use in clinic.
You could actually, when I went to go see Manni, he pinpointed the pain so well. I remember you pressed on my leg and went, it's gonna hurt here. And it did.
I've had my fair few rodeos. I've done this quite a few times.
I'm not unique. I had a very common problem.
We are all very unique in individuals, but the problems tend to present consistently in most groups. Unfortunately, this type of problem, it can be more apparent in newer runners, which I think you were going for Amsterdam, your first marathon, right? So,
yeah.
That's true, and we knew it could be something that could happen.
So we've talked about how to know if you've got an injury.
Yes.
If you have been out on a run and something's happened and you've gone, oh no, you've booked maybe to see a medical professional.
Yeah.
I've always heard the saying RICE.
Yeah.
Rest, ice, compression, elevation.
Yep.
Is that true anymore? Is there anything else you can do?
Well, I think we've had an evolution of thought. So there's something called peace and love, which has been...
That's an awesome I love that. Is that an acronym as well?
It's an acronym, yeah. It's been actually proposed. And basically, we want to move away from just completely resting, because we need to get blood flow into the tissue, but we also need to protect it. So the P in peace and love is to protect, okay? Then we obviously want to elevate, because that can help with some of the swelling. We now know that taking anti-inflammatories really early in recovery isn't something that we think is as beneficial as we previously thought. So,
really?
Yeah.
So if you get back home from a run and you've, rolled your ankle, or you felt a little niggle, you shouldn't be taking paracetamol or ibuprofen?
that's the way we're moving towards. Yeah, the evidence is showing that actually your inflammatory process is beneficial. It's beneficial for your recovery, and it's something we should allow to happen naturally.
And is that like swelling, it getting quite hot, all of that stuff, the kind of blood flow going to the area?
Exactly, and the reason why you get the swelling and all the redness and some of the heat is actually because blood vessels rupture. So that can sound a bit abrupt, but it's important for that to happen. And then you get some white blood cells, and you get some really nice healing. And it's good for us to have that. It's a protective mechanism, and we do need to move through it so that the blood changes. It changes in terms of how much is in the area, and it flows through. But we shouldn't take anti-inflammatories in the early stages of some soft tissue injuries. Okay. Yeah. The other thing to think about, we're keeping the compression like we had in rice, okay, which is really important. So it can just, with that extra swelling and extra blood, with the compression, it just helps with that flush out, okay? And then the last thing is education. So sometimes we get quite caught up in trying to change the pain and really trying to do something called passive treatment. So you might want to go for a massage straight away. Sometimes your body knows what it's doing. Your body is king. It will help you get better. Yeah. So have you ever rolled your ankle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And many a time.
You've rolled it lots of times. And sometimes when you roll your ankle, all you need to do is have a break, right? And generally it gets better.
Yeah. So we've talked about peace.
Yes.
What about love?
So love is all about, first of all, loading, okay? So we need to just make sure we're moving. Protecting the area, but you still have to move. You have to load your tissue, because if you load your tissue, just help with the recovery, okay? Optimism is one of the most important things in rehab. We need to make sure we keep thinking positively in our recovery, and I really agree with this. I think the mind is such a powerful tool when we're injured. Yeah. Have you ever thought that?
Yeah, well, it's like if you come back to running after a break, you need that optimism as well, because if you think, we were talking about this in a previous video about losing fitness. If you think you've lost fitness, then the fitness that you've lost, will be there. But if you're thinking negatively as well, then it'll appear 10 times worse. And same with your injury. It's a fact of life and of running that if you run for a long time, you're probably going to pick up an injury at some point. That's kind of the norm. But if you think negatively about that injury and kind of get really, really down, then it's just going to make things worse.
I think it's also part of sport, and if it's really important that we are okay with having to take some time away, and it's normal. Yeah. Next up, we have vascularization. What that means is getting blood flow to the area. So yes, loading will do that, but also thinking about how you just generally do any sort of cardiovascular exercise. So maybe you might go on a bike because we can't run, or maybe your injury will be something that allows you to use a cross trainer. Okay, so all those things are going to be really nice to get your heart pumping and keep some of that fitness you were talking about.
Yeah, well, that's what Rick was doing after his first surgery. He couldn't run, but he could go on the bike.
Exactly.
And that is a good way of keeping up your fitness as well.
Definitely. Lastly, we want to think about exercise, okay? But exercise in terms of increasing range of movement, doing things that hopefully build strength. So maybe you have an injury in your right leg, you can actually do strength work on your left leg. Okay. You can also do strength work on your upper body. And just thinking about ensuring that you maintain your range of movement also. So it's all really, really important to think, although you're injured, doesn't mean that you completely do nothing.
So Manni, let's round off by talking about some common injuries and what you should do if you get them. So starting off with type of pain.
Okay.
So from my understanding, there are kind of two different types of pain. The kind of really pinpointed, specific, you know exactly where it is, and then the slightly kind of duller, it's in a kind of general area type of pain.
Yeah.
What should you do with those two different types of things?
Okay, sharp pain, it's all dependent on what's preceded the sharp pain. So what's happened, why have you got sharp pain? I think sharp pain definitely can halt us in our tracks, but sometimes we can move through that and it's okay. And sharp pain, actually, from my perspective, I'm not as worried about. Now, the dull ache that's really persistent, that continues to grumble on, those I'm actually more concerned about, and how long they last for. So if you are having that dull ache, please go and see somebody. If you've had a big fall and there's been a really a really kind of high energy injury. So when we say high energy injury, we mean that a fall or something where you've hit the ground really quickly or moved really quickly and you've got sharp pain, I would definitely go and see a medical professional because of that. Okay, so those are two of the main reasons and the two of the specific things that I look for in the types of pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
Okay, another one that we get quite a lot in the comments is Achilles.
Yes, Achilles. Now, we can get Achilles pain for lots of different reasons. The Achilles is really important to load, and you get an increase in protein when you're loading the Achilles. And there's something called a tendinopathy. And what that means is that the protein in your tendon, it's changed, and the way that it works is different. And the tendon's not as stiff. It's a common injury for a lot of runners, especially if you start to increase your running suddenly.
Nice, okay. And then another buzzword in the world of running, knee pain.
Knee pain. Now, knee pain is not just all knee pain, and it's not always arthritis. So you ever heard people always go, running's bad for your knee? And we know that knee pain can be a number of factors, a number of injuries. What I would say to you is, if you do have knee pain, we need to identify if it's at the front of the knee or the side of the knee. Those are probably two of the most important questions that I think of. If the knee pain is consistent, and again, we talked about 6 out of 10 as the worst pain, we really need to go and see somebody. If you have knee pain that causes your knee to lock, that's really something I want you to go and see somebody about immediately. So seek medical help immediately, because that could tell us there's some sort of blockage or cartilage that in your knee that's affecting your knee and affecting the way it moves.
Another one that we always get, shin pain.
Shin pain. Oh, have you ever had shin pain?
I think when I was younger, but I think that was kind of mixed in with that like growing pain kind of phase. But lots of my friends have had shin splints, and it can be really minor, it can be really major, it can be debilitating, and there is lots of different problems with that as well, isn't there?
Yes, exactly. So a lot of us in the general public and in the world use shin splints as a term. Shin splints actually is not a condition. It's just a term. It's just us trying to say, oh, you've got general pain around your shin. But it could be so many different things. It could be compartment syndrome. This is when your muscles and the compartments in your shins, they actually become quite inflamed and really, really uncomfortable. You can have a vascular issue. You could have a bone fracture. You could have exercise-induced pain. So there are lots of different conditions. So what we need to do with shin pain is definitely get a really good diagnosis before you go off and start doing anything. And I do see a lot of people icing their shins. Don't be too quick to do that, okay? Because actually protecting the area, resting, doing some cardio that is different from running, all those things actually could be more beneficial for you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then finally, foot pain.
Right, foot pain, really, really key condition, and our feet are so important. With our feet, there's so many different areas that could be affected, but one area we really, really want to be thinking about is the outside area. So it's called your fifth metatarsal. If you have pain there, definitely go and seek medical attention really, really quickly, because we tend to have a high likelihood of a stress fracture in that area. We also get pain in between our toes, in between the webs, and these are called neuromas, and there's lots of different types. Again, seek medical attention. And last one that I want you to think about at home is obviously plantar fasciitis or plantar fasciopathy. This will get better with rest and strength. One last thing with feet, you can see a podiatrist. Podiatrists are great for feet. So some of them might give you something to put in your shoe just to take some of the load off and really support your recovery.
I think it's important as well when talking about foot pain. Obviously, as runners, it's quite common to get a few blisters, especially if you're going into longer races. Your feet can look a little bit of a state at the end of that, and that can lead you to change the way that you're running. If you're running with a blister, say on your big toe or on the outside of your foot, you can run through that pain, but that pain might mean that you shift the weight a little bit, and then that could lead to further problems, couldn't it?
Definitely. You change your biomechanics. Biomechanics, what we're trying to talk about here is how your limbs are moving, how your body is working as you're moving over the ground. Now, if you have an area on your foot that's uncomfortable, what you're going to do, you're going to try and offload that area.
Yeah.
And that will mean that you work harder in different areas. So be careful out there. If you do have something that's going on, seek medical attention sooner rather than later. Don't do what Sarah did.
Don't do me. Hopefully that has answered lots of your questions to do with running and injuries. But if you do have any more questions for Manni, then please do leave them in the comments. And we will see you next time on the Running Channel.
Peace.